All right. In an effort to make things a little easier, I've mixed up some mortar here. And just to give you an idea of its consistency and the proper consistency of mortar, essentially what you want is peanut butter, but not like thick peanut butter, maybe like all natural peanut butter that you have to mix the oil in. It's usually pretty soupy. But you don't want it too soupy, because otherwise it's just going to run off your tile. So you want something that'll kind of hold an edge. That being said, usually when I mix it slightly soupier initially, and then I wait 5 or 10 minutes and it thickens up. And that allows the cement and the sand to kind of coalesce, and the sand or the dryness to absorb the water, and you end up with this consistency. See how it stays on my knife pretty well? That's what you want. You don't want it to really fall off of your knife. If it's going this way, it'll fall off a little bit, but once you start applying it to the tile, it should work just great. Any thicker and it becomes difficult to apply the tile, and any thinner your tiles just slide. They don't stay where they're supposed to stay on the wall. They just slide down. Now we'll be supporting them anyway from underneath so that you can lay tile on top of them. But technically, when you use this consistency, when you use it, when you apply it to the tile and then to the tile to the wall, it should stay in place. This is called back buttering. That's what I learned it was called anyway. It might not be called that in some circles, but that's what I learned it was called. And it's very useful for laying individual tiles. You don't know exactly where you're going to set them. It's a little bit more time consuming, but it's better for placing them in specific places. It's also good if you can't see your line without doing it. So I've already marked horizontal level lines, and this allows me to line it up a little easier.
With the horizontal level lines.
Connection up there. Holy moly.
Hear the sound of somebody still working.
Also, while I'm thinking about it, this is a tile plastic wedge. They're fantastic. Home Depot sells this trash one that's stupid. I'm not sure who invented it, but it's just junk. The reason I like these is because you can cut them. They're slightly squishy, so they're a little spongy. So if it's not quite in the right place, you can usually squish it down a little bit. You can adjust it by slicing it. So these work really good. They're just the perfect size. You can reuse them. I like them I've been using them for years and years and years. I just love them. Another one is these. And you'll have a hard time finding these as well at Home Depot because they've replaced them with some trash ones again. Again, the reason I like these is because the other ones are more hard plastic, and they're junk. I mean, I know people like to reuse them, but they advertise these, or they used to advertise them as leave-in, but I would never leave these in. Usually I end up sticking them straight in. I don't leave them for a corner per tile, a tile in each corner, because that doesn't work. But I like these because they're relatively simple to cut for all your various shape needs. But I never ever leave in my tile spacers. Sometimes if you need the tile to stick out a little further from the wall, you can put a layer of this on and then scrape it off and leave the mortar in the joints, and then put a layer on the wall, or you can do this and then put a layer on the wall and the tile will stick out extra far. We don't need that here because these tiles are sticking pretty good, but that's just in case. Just in case you do. Another thing is if you use spacers in between every tile in the X shape, like I'm using these little 16th, if you use them stuck in between like this, your wall will end up totally out of plumb and level. Totally. And that's because these tiles are not ever perfectly square. They're not all the same size. They're close, but they're not all the same size. And the spacers are pretty close in size. So if you go by everything being exact, then nothing will be exact. And you'll end up with really shoddy work, which is why a lot of guys have shoddy work, because they think that construction materials are a perfect science. I was actually pretty impressed with the hexagon tiles that I installed in here, because they were pretty good. Now these cheapy tiles, they're not pretty good. I wouldn't worry too much about the corners. You want to get them pretty close because you're going to have to caulk the joint. But getting them really close is not vital. I would recommend caulking all of the corners as opposed to grouting them, mainly because it's a little easier. And it can turn out looking better in the long run. With grout caulk, you have to buy grout caulk. It's a pain to work with, and But if you do it right, it turns out working pretty good. I have a video on YouTube about caulking methods, and you might look at that to get some tips. All right, so my technique for doing the, let's see if I can get that on the camera, the back buttering, right? So we get a bit on the tile. It's not vital to cover every single inch. I usually like to get, if it's a little too close to the edge, I like to actually wipe a little off, because I don't like it to gush out of the sides. If the mortar drips on the tile, it doesn't matter. It'll dry and then you'll just pop it right off. It's not a problem at all. If it gets on the face of the tile, it doesn't matter. It will just dry and then you can rub it right off. So get that on there, stick it on, kind of give it a couple wiggles, make sure it's lined up pretty evenly. I mean, it's not vital to be perfect. Technically, you could just stick it and leave it, and it would probably just stay. But because you're going to be putting tiles on top, and some of them could droop, it's better if you brace them from below. Usually, I use these if I can, because I don't have very many wedges. And I usually just stick them in just like that. And that usually gets me pretty close to where I need to be. If I need to adjust it, like I'll look at this in relation to this. If it looks pretty good, I'll just leave it. If it needs to be adjusted, I'll pop one of those out and put one of these in and make sure everything's lined up with everything else. So that's about the long and the short of it. And I'm just going to finish up these last tiles, and I'll leave the rest. Another thing, the tile saw is not really accurate. It's pretty accurate. I usually hand cut the wall tiles instead of using the guides, just because it's a little easier. I'll draw a pencil line on there. You could probably use a marker as well, like a magic marker, like a Sharpie, a really fine tip Sharpie, like a super fine tip Sharpie. I usually just use a pencil and I'll measure it or use my finger and, you know, do the old carpenter trick. It doesn't write on very well, but usually that line is enough for me to get an idea of what I need on the saw, and then with a little water it washes right off. But I do that, but I usually try to get within the base surface and the top of my level line or whatever when you're going around the edge. I try to get about a 1/16 of an inch gap, because that'll end up being caulked. Too close, and it just doesn't work very well. Too far away, and this is just too big of a gap to caulk. So I try to keep it an eighth to a 1/16, or less than an eighth to a 1/16 of space in between the base tile and the level line above. Obviously, your level line will line up with this edge, and this will be the crooked edge, and that's just the way it is.